All right. Looks like we have a nice crowd coming in, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am LaShirl Amirbe, Program Director for Camber Outdoors. I'm excited to be here today for our second conversation, 2024. It's our seventh overall, y'all, so it's a great conversation. I'm excited to have everybody here. Today's conversation with the DEI will highlight how to navigate inclusivity and belonging in today's polarizing environment. Great to have some of you back for another impactful conversation, and welcome if this is your first conversation. We appreciate you being a part of the Camber community. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathering on Indigenous lands. These lands have been home to Native American tribes for countless generations, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Let us take a moment to recognize the deep connection between the land, its original stewards, and the work we do today in advancing DEI. Thank you, and let's proceed with our discussion. Today, Camber will share insights and industry leaders will join us to discuss the impact of moving forward with the important work of making and keeping organizations inclusive for the success and the well-being of our diverse society. We will share challenges and tips and insights as many of you move towards making the changes and progress in your inclusive journey. We will have some featured speakers that I can't wait for you all to hear from that will speak about the best practices during these challenging times. I'd like to emphasize that the insights and best practices shared during this webinar are not intended as legal advice. While we strive to provide practical strategies for fostering inclusion in a polarized world, it's essential to consult with legal professionals or experts for specific legal guidance. The information presented here is based on industry expertise and actionable knowledge, but individual circumstances may vary. Always consider your unique context and seek professional advice when making decisions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to thank our partners and good friends over at VF Foundation for their continuous support of our conversations, and thank you for the continued support overall. Before we get started, I want to take care of some housekeeping business, so let's take a look at our norms. We urge you to be honest, and when we say be honest, make sure you're being honest with yourself, especially with today's conversation. It'll be poignant to do so. Be open-minded, be clear, be kind and courteous, and activate your growth mindset. Let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda today. And we'll take a look at that so you have a better flow and understanding of today. So we'll have our goal overview. Make sure you kind of have an understanding of our targeted goal for you. Our CEO will provide a special message to open us up. We'll talk about current trends and stats, guest panel insights. We'll do a Q&A session, camera resources and reminders, and then we'll close with our CEO special message. Before we dive in today, I want to share our goal for today's webinar. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. We want to equip attendees with practical strategies, industry insights, and actionable resources to advance inclusivity within organizations during challenging times. So take a look at that, digest it. We'll come back and reflect on that a little bit later today. At this time, I want to give an honor and a shout out to our CEO and allow her to come on and welcome us into our webinar. Tiffany, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, LaShirl. Super excited about this conversation. What the DEI? We have all been hearing and seeing in the news all types of things. And so I'm just super grateful to have this conversation today with our partners, with stakeholders, and with the entire business community. I am thankful that the board and I really launched this last year with the Camber team, and this has been a great resource, not just to our partners, but just to all individuals that are focused on change within the industry. So thank you again for attending today. And so as I come to you today, I am someone that is deeply, deeply invested in the journey towards true diversity, equity, and inclusion. But before we really dive into the stats and the tools and the resources, let's just take a moment to really reflect on the recent event that has impacted many of us here, even at Camber. And I'm talking about the disappointing ruling against the Fearless Fund blocking grants exclusively created for Black women entrepreneurs. That initiative was a beacon for Black women entrepreneurs, offering hope and tangible support to those historically overlooked and underserved by the investment community. This ruling feels like a heavy blow in our ongoing fight for equity and inclusion as we are seen it impact educational systems and even corporate America. We've seen organizations stepping back at a time when we should be relentlessly moving forward. Funding for nonprofits that are the lifelines of underrepresented communities have been slashed. The role of some chief diversity officers, crucial for steering corporate inclusion, is either diminished or even eliminated. This has been noticeable decreased even in BIPOC voices on significant platforms, fewer keynotes, fewer panelists at conferences where their insights are most needed. But most disturbingly, we've witnessed companies abandoning their commitments to diversity and inclusion. These are not just breaches of promises, these are retreats from the principles of justice and equality. At the same time, we see nonprofits starved for resources, finding themselves competing for dollars, a scenario that distracts them from their core mission of impactful change and communal uplift. This decrease is not merely disappointing, it is dangerous. Every decision to cut funding, every removed position of influence for marginalized voices, and every unkept promise is a decision against progress. It affects real people, real lives, and the real future of our communities. If I'm honest, emotionally, this retreat creates a narrative of exclusion and a reality of delusion. It tells talented, ambition, and visionary individuals from underrepresented backgrounds that there is no place for them at this table. It whispers that the ladder of opportunity is being pulled up just as they approach it. It represents a collective step backward at this moment when societal currents demand that we surge ahead. With all of that, even if we looked at the hard facts, I'm going to give you a few here, and just a practical viewpoint, we cannot afford to back down now. Studies show us that companies with diverse workforces are not just better places to work, they perform better too. According to McKinsey, companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their national industry medians. This is not just a stat, it's a testament to the power of diversity to drive success and innovation in our organizations. These stats speak loudly, and we proudly echo their message because we reflect the lived realities of our partner companies right here at Camber, where we are seeing progress, innovation, and fairness. We recently published our 2023 DEI report on inclusive leadership practices. Our team will go ahead and provide the link in the chat if you have not had a chance to download our first key report for the year. But it really illuminates the profound impact of our collaborative efforts with our partners. Our findings are not just numbers, but they're narratives of transformation and commitment through DEI. For instance, 76% of our partners, our Camber partners, now prioritize strengths and experience over traditional metrics like education or tenure in their recruitment processes. This shift makes a significant departure from old paradigms, and that paves the way for more equitable opportunities. Moreover, our commitment does not stop just at altering hiring practices. Over 80% of all of our Camber employers have made concerted efforts to reach out to and recruit talent from historically underrepresented communities. We have implemented mentorship programs, diversity training, and inclusive policies to ensure that our workplaces are safe and welcoming for all. This is a response to a moment of social reckoning and a sustained strategy to enrich our workplaces with diverse perspectives and skills. With national conversation around systemic racism and other pressing social issues, again, I'm proud to report that 90% of our employers and employees participating in our Camber survey system have either increased or maintained their investment in DEI resources. This dedication is also evident in our approach to LGBTQIA+ concerns, with the same percentage of employers continuing to invest in necessary DEI initiatives. This just isn't about being on the right side of history. It's about being on the right side of the future, a future where our bottom line is directly tied to how inclusive and diverse our teams are. I'm going to repeat that one more time. It is about being on the right side of the future, where a future where our bottom line is directly tied to how inclusive and diverse our teams are. Our workplace culture is not just a reflection of the world as it is, but as it should be: equitable, inclusive, and just. The path forward is clear. It requires courage, resilience, and tenacity from all of us, especially those in leadership positions. It's about more than just policies and quotas. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive regardless of background. It's about having difficult conversations, challenging our biases, and learning from one another. We encourage you during this time today to lean into the conversation with the panelists that you're going to hear from. We've received numerous questions from you all, and we're going to try our best to get to them all live. And if not, we'll be sure to send you an email. But I am excited to continue on with this conversation, because I know every single person on this webinar today has an unwavering commitment, and you're standing fearlessly in the face of adversity and opposition as we continue to embrace change through workspaces. LaCheryl, let's continue this conversation. I cannot wait to hear what our panelists have to say today.
Wow, Tiffany, powerful opening, very poignant. Thank you so much. So now that Tiffany has warmed us up, great information there. Let's now talk about what we see on the screen. We're going to dip into some current trends and some different things that are happening currently right now in our outdoor industry. So we're going to do that by taking a look at one of the questions that we posed to you. We asked you what the DEI, now we'll move into why DEI. Let's take a look at the data that Camber has been able to gather from our dedicated partners in the industry via our Camber survey, which takes a look at the industry with a focused lens. Society is changing, and we will continue to see increased growth through 2030. So Tiffany talked a lot about that in her opening speech. The spike in participation of organizations increased in 2020, and that need has not subsided. This data speaks volumes about why is it imposed on our practitioners in the space, right? The last stat taps into the underrepresented groups that Tiffany talked about, who reported gaps of inclusivity at the executive leadership level, including gender and racial groups. We see a need for much more room for improvement in the industry. If you want to, you can go ahead and take a scan there. I know Tina has also dropped that. Thank you so much. That link into the chat, and that will give you exclusive insider information into our Inclusive Culture Leadership Practices report. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's take a deeper look now into the current trends within the industry when it comes to inclusivity. Organizational alignment and best practices is something that sticks out amongst underrepresented groups. On the upside, you can see that there has been continual growth in diversification and organizational commitment to DEI. We do realize that a lot of this has shifted in the last few years. So when we take a look at that last stat, we'll have a little bit more information as we kind of wind down into 2024 when we go into our next Camber survey. But we wanted to take this time to take a look at those current trends before we get into our conversation. Today, our guests will help us dig deeper into the question of what the DEI concerning how to navigate in a polarized world and why it's critical to our growth within the industry and beyond. I want to introduce our first guest who will shed some light on the topic for today. But before we do, I'd like to reemphasize for those who joined us a bit late that the insights and best practices shared during this webinar are not intended as legal advice. It is essential to consult with legal professionals or experts for specific legal guidance as you work to create more inclusive environments within your organizations. First up, we have Ephanis Henderson. Ephanis is the president and CEO of HenderWorks, Inc. He is also the co-founder of the Institute of Sustainable Diversity and Inclusion. He served as Chief Diversity Officer at Weyerhaeuser Company until his retirement in 2013. As an internationally recognized leader in diversity and equity and inclusion, he has shared his expertise with numerous corporations and organizations worldwide. He has also played a pivotal role in developing robust information, He also played a pivotal role in developing global diversity inclusion standards, there we go, as a member of the United States Technical Committee 260 for the International Organization of Standards. Lots to share there, Ephanis. So thank you so much for being here. Go ahead and throw some fire in the chat for this enormous topic, this hot topic that Ephanis is going to touch on today. Ephanis, welcome. We are honored to have you join us the conversation today. How you feeling?
Well, thank you so much, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. This work is very important to me. I have a fairly long history and know sort of the evolution of the work. And I know that we're at a very fragile moment now with the pushback that we're seeing around the country to DEI efforts and programs, much of which is driven by a small set of far-right activists who are challenging specific dimensions of programs that organizations have. But let me be clear, it is still very important for organizations to continue to use DEI as part of their human resources practices, their strategies, and so forth. One of the things that my background, I come out of private industry. I worked in the forest products industry for Weyerhaeuser for a number of years in a variety of human resources positions. And so I come with a human resources background, a private industry background, and also as the convener for the working group that established the first global standard for diversity and inclusion through the International Organization for Standardization. It's ISO 30415 2021, if you want to look it up. And it provides sort of a framework for how to think about DEI efforts strategically. What I will tell you is that there's no cookie cutter approach, first of all, to how you put in place a framework for DEI in your organization. But there are some fairly significant principles around how to create sustainable change. And first and foremost, I would tell you, and not to try to cover the waterfront, really try to understand kind of what's the current state of diversity within the organization and how does it help us achieve our organizational objectives and goals. And so the more you can engage with leadership, in fact, I would tell you that that's where I would encourage you to start by having leadership dive in and talk about commitment. And I know a lot of organizations over the last few years have gone into a process of developing commitment statement. The question is, who wrote the commitment statement? Did they write it? Were they engaged in it, or did they review it? Because part of that process is getting clarity around terminology and words. Many organizational leaders say, yeah, I'm supportive of diversity, but they have different ideas and thoughts about what that really means. They have different ideas about what equity means or inclusion. So it's important for them to create sort of a level playing field on what the definitions and terminology means, because if you don't get that, there's lack of clarity. For example, some people might think about diversity as just relating to protected classes or women and people of color. But diversity in its entirety incorporates every dimension of difference that we all bring to the workplace, irrespective of your race and gender and so forth. So all of those things are important for them to get clarity around. You know, I had someone say, we're in the process of looking for some new candidates, and I want a diverse person for the job. And I said, let me correct you. There's no such thing as a diverse person. Mm-hmm. There are people that may represent some aspects of diversity that's underrepresented in your organization. And so you're probably wanting to seek out people who are from those communities that are not as well represented in the workplace that you'd like. But there's no such thing as a diverse person. So if you've used that term, please strike it. It's a sort of not an appropriate and true reflection of what diversity really means, and so forth. So I would say, first of all, continue to really work with your leaders, the more you can tie this work to organizational outcomes, the fact that the stakeholders that you're involved with are likely to be more diverse, and those that take into consideration DEI efforts in organizations are likely to be more successful in garnering positive, sustainable relationships with employees, with suppliers, with customers, with regulators, and so forth. And so for me, it's really about taking a holistic approach to it and looking at all of the stakeholders that you're working with, and to remember that there's no cookie cutter approach. There are some basic fundamental principles, and I think the standard will provide you some ideas about what some of those are. So I'll just stop there for a moment, and because I know there are other questions and ideas, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there for the moment.
You teaching. Take a look at the chat. It's blowing up. They got some insights there just based off of what you just said. So we do appreciate that. You know, Tiffany spoke about this a little bit during her opening, and we spoke a little bit offline about some of the legal changes that are happening concerning inclusivity. Can you talk about a little bit, just based on your experience and kind of your forethought about the future, what legal challenges do organizations face in implementing DEI initiatives? And are there any specific legal considerations to kind of think about for leaders?
Yeah, I would first of all say become familiar with laws and regulations that govern affirmative action, that govern equal employment opportunity, and that govern all of the protected classes, right? Title VI and Title VII are things to be aware of. Think about how you're framing your communications, your information, your programs, because one of the things that we're seeing now is that these anti-DEI forces are really going after anything that they might describe as discrimination, quotas, and so forth. And so you need to be careful about those. But what I will tell you is that the Supreme Court ruling in the Harvard and University of North Carolina case in admissions really had nothing to do with private industry programs. If you were to contact someone from the EEOC, they would tell you that those good faith efforts that organizations have employed still are very relevant and very important. What we are also seeing now is an area that you need to be concerned about is risk mitigation, and the EEOC and the OFCCP have basically published some statistics and data that would tell you that there is an uptick in discriminatory claims because of unfair treatment, marginalization, harassment, discrimination. And they're not coming from the far right. Some of it is, but a lot of it is coming from folks who don't believe that they are being treated fairly and equitably in their organizations and so forth. So I would tell you that stay in tune with all of the regulatory requirements and so forth. Contact and rely on your legal resources to provide guidance to you, but don't necessarily back away from your efforts. I did a study of the challenge to some of these programs in corporate America, and the challenges or challenges to things like pipeline programs, how you represent data and information on your websites and so forth, how your commitment statements are constructed. They are actually literally looking at everything word by word. And if there is something that they can attack in the way that you've stated, irrespective of how well you're doing in all the other areas, they'll use that one area to amplify their perspective that you are being discriminatory or you have unfair practices and so forth. So be very careful about that and to think about it in that way. But I would tell you that the more you can relate what you do to your organizational outcomes, your mission, your goals, your value, your human resources practices, I think the better off you'll be.
Awesome. I really love what you said, and I'll probably use that from now on. Don't back away from your efforts. It's just that simple. I appreciate that one, Evanis. Just to kind of summarize the conversation, I want to end with this question. We kind of talk about best practices and what to do currently, but I want to kind of look forward into the future. Can you talk about moving away from best practices and into next practices as we look into the future and some of the legal things that are coming down the pipe?
Oh, okay, that's a very
It's a tough one, huh?
aspirational and futuristic question. I would tell you that certain things to be very concerned about and to study as artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
the use of technology to drive systems, practices, and processes. ChatGPT and other types of innovations are good, but they have to be managed. And so I think that will fall into the sphere of DEI practices and HR practices in terms of how data is developed, how it's shared, and so forth. I also would tell you that I've been doing some work on what I call the agility and adaptability model, maturity model. Many of you in HR and DEI have looked at sort of the intercultural model, which is more of a linear model from someone who doesn't have a clue about this work to moving up. But I'd argue that you have to tease out the work. You have to focus on in your organization where you have the most significant gaps against a set of outcomes you're trying to achieve in this area, and that those outcomes should tie back to your commitment statement that you've made as a company, and that commitment statement should tie to the organizational strategies and so forth. So from strategies to commitment to actions to gaps to measures and outputs and so forth, taking a project management approach to the work, I think, is what you're going to see in the future. A lot of folks have been involved in what I'd characterize as performative work, and that's important in terms of having conversations, monthly book club meetings, celebrating heritage months and so forth. But what you really want to do is dive into what is it, where do we have our most significant gaps in terms of practices, processes, policies, and where is leadership in terms of that? And so I think going forward, you're going to have to take a more expansive view, first of all, of the concept of diversity, and not just focus it on certain dimensions of diversity, but just thinking just overall and holistically and intersectionally about the work.
Awesome, Ephanis. Thank you so much for the insight. I hope that our attendees soaked up that knowledge, and we are just getting started. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. Last but certainly not least, we want to introduce Ms. Erica O'Neill to the conversation. Erica is best in the business, sports industry business executive and leader. She has a long time standing commitment to diversity and public service. Erica is a strategic diversity, equity, and social responsibility professional and lawyer. In late 2020, she joined New York Roadrunners as the Senior Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And Erica has led New York Roadrunners' cultural shift toward a more inclusive environment that extends to the community. Please drop some emojis in the chat for Erica as we welcome her to the screen. Erica, welcome on in. How you feeling today from New York?
I'm feeling great. Thank you so much. And I also feel like, thank you, good night, Ephanis. You just dropped all the mics.
Yeah.
I was trying to avoid going in the chat myself, dropping the fire emojis and trying to pay attention, but that was so much rich knowledge. I just needed to pause and call that out. It's such thoughtful, powerful, impactful information in just a few minutes. Kudos.
Absolutely, Erica. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to just move the conversation forward. So let's dig in. Erica, we have lots of smaller organizations, right, that also need assistance. Some have even asked some of these questions directly. So when it comes to inclusivity in smaller organizations with limited resources, what do you recommend that they start with the DEI conversation with? Like, where do they begin?
Awesome. So I'll start really quickly. One of the notions is while you are building or advocating for a budget to have a extraordinary partner like Camber, there are also tons while you're building up to that space. There are tons of free resources. There's organizations like Hollaback, which are based in New York, and they do tons of free training. They have paid trainings, and then each week they offer a free bystander, allyship, advocacy, harassment intervention training. There are organizations like the Harvard Implicit Association Test, the Management Center, which provides a lot of free resources if you are focusing on your hiring, performance review, feedback, and baking in equitable principles into those processes. NIH, National Institution of Health, has free information and PowerPoint slide decks around microaggressions. I think looking at your educational institutions, so that's just in your libraries. There are quick resources there to start to gather the resources for training and education. But my first word of advice would be to pause, to do an assessment of really what you're working with, right? Where are your advocates, internal allies? Do you know who your who the advocates on your leadership team, on your board, who are going to be your resistors and your early adapters? So you do really need to have kind of both happening. So people often get caught in the flash, right? That is the easy programs, the light lift, the training, these celebratory observations, months, calendars. Those things are important, but they're only part of the process. My recommendation is to do an assessment of the org structure, policies, practices, and systems to understand, as Evan has said, your gaps. So there is a mistake to focus on one or the other. You do need to focus on your internal policies, practices, and ensuring that you're doing the work internally. It's always an inside out approach, right? We see organizations crash and burn when they're focusing on what it looks like. Pictures, images, the showing up in the community around specific days and time. There's got to be this notion of commitment to community engagement all year long. But when you do this work and you haven't spoken to, assessed, or cared for your staff, you're setting yourself up for failure. So that's really kind of, I'd start there with this notion of inside out approach. Spend some time developing a strategy, right? That strategy doesn't remain the same, but in the beginning, limited resources, understand and assess where you are. I see people jump in attempting to boil the ocean. They want to do everything, and then they end up doing nothing. And that needs to be balanced by there's only so much time of learning and listening. Now people need to see an action in those spaces. And I'd add this other piece. We see folks jump immediately to the hiring and recruiting. And that can feel a lot like hiring people with a variety of abilities, disabilities, age, racial and ethnicity diversity without doing anything to change your internal operations, removing barriers to access. You're just recruiting people into a gaping hole in the floor. We're just losing. So
really good, really good. Hopefully y'all took that away. Inside out approach. That's very insightful. Thank you for that one, Erica. I think Effin has touched on this a little bit, and probably Tiffany a little bit in her opening message. Language is huge, right? And so that's kind of the thing that we're dealing with as the words are being weaponized, different terms. And so especially in today's world, what would you say organizations using language outside the term DEI based on the current weaponizing of it? Should they stick with it, move away? Kind of what's your gauge on that?
That's a great question. And I'm one of the folks, for instance, my actual title is diversity, equity, and social responsibility, because I see this as it's important that an org is committed to being a good corporate citizen. That really means this focus. I am less concerned about whether you're saying IDA, DEI, my personal thing is inclusion. I actually have avoided the word inclusion because it often means inviting people into something that exists, and you're saying come fit into the space. I use it as an example because I don't care what you call it as long as you continue the work. And so people can rebrand and retitle, but understand the work will continue. I have been in this space for almost 20 years. I have had this in my title for almost 20 years. That work I've seen the tides change. And one of the things I know for sure is the work will continue. I don't care what you call it. I said this earlier in our kind of pre-chat is the EEOC has not stopped receiving complaints about discrimination, and we cannot erase our history of there are historical inequities that has led to barriers to inclusion, access, workplace inclusion. And when we try to rewrite history, it will lead many organizations and people into a path that I think people are delusional about. So I talked to a couple of colleagues who've been doing this work, a number of attorneys, organizations like the Perception Institute, who've actually never used the phrase DEI, but they've been doing the work. The Othering of Belonging Institutes, Race Forward, those folks don't use the phrase DEI, but the work, they're continuing to train up an army of people that are focusing on undoing historical inequities and harms with a specific focus on the workplace.
Love that take on language and just making sure that the action is behind the language. That's the most important part. Love that take. That's great. We'll kind of switch gears a little bit here and ask a question that kind of talks about some of the social identities that exist, right? So how can organizations create more inclusive spaces for those considering the intersections that exist within all organizations? For example, those with disabilities, some of the categories or groups of people we kind of leave out and don't think about as much. How do you wrap your head around that as an organizational leader when it comes to intersectionality?
Sure, great question. One is it's a notion of continuing to think about this as a race or a race plus conversation. It is race and gender, sexual orientation and identity and disability and the list goes on, but I think that still goes back to an inside out approach. Organizations understanding, who are you working with? Are you asking these questions? Have you done an assessment of your own internal workforce demographics? Who's here in the room, in the conversation? Who are we considering? And so I think a lot of folks jump into this without any conversation about their own internal staff, workforce, as well as then considering your audience, right? And so we talked about, Tiffany gave that data earlier, organizations that are operating in a silo without understanding their audiences and community and are speaking in a language that is not inclusive will not see the greatest level of success. But I do think it goes back to an assessment and creating a strategy when you understand and create space for folks to feel like they belong and they can talk about their religion, they can talk about their identity, they can talk about their family at work. That's that notion of more of yourself, a sense of belonging. And then you understand people can say to you, no, I can't really, work or show up this day. I'm like, there's a religious reason why I can't do X or a cultural reason why I don't want to do this. You understand that when you are serving your workforce, it will help you to model how you're serving your community and your audience. So it is creating that space, whether that is, and again, that doesn't require large systems. Are you doing a simple survey monkey? There are ways to do a bit of a assessment of your internal community to help you align with your external strategy.
I really like that. The focus on strategy. You got to work within, get your team together, make it happen there first. Love that. Erica, thanks so much for your thoughts. At this time, I want to invite both guests and our CEO, Tiffany, back onto the screen. We're going to do a little Q&A session. I want to thank our attendees so much for your awesome questions. So everybody come on back on the screen. Let's see if we can get some of these questions tackled. Great questions, y'all. All righty. Everyone ready? Good to go? All right. Let's take a look at some of the questions here. Let's go. So this first question, I think, let's see, I'll kick this first question over to Ephanis. It says the biggest threat you see today in our DEI focused work. Can you address that a little bit? What do you think the biggest threat towards the work that we do is right now?
I think the biggest threat is people who are mischaracterizing it, mischaracterizing the concept of diversity, mischaracterizing and not fully understanding equity, what it means, as well as inclusion. So, I mean, they say, let's get rid of DEI. There are three separate and distinct principles, in terms of this work. And, for example, equity is really about looking at your practices, processes, and systems and seeing if they create a disadvantage or an advantage to certain communities and so forth. Diversity really is about the rich degree of differences within an organization and not just focusing on just a couple of different dimensions, that they're not mutually exclusive. There is some level of intersectionality and interconnectedness across the differences. And diversity is not just about personal characteristics. It's also about invisible characteristics. So bringing that to the fore as well. There's an organization that does a lot of work in the disability space, Disability In. It's a national organization that provides a lot of tools and resources for people who want to really understand that. So that's what I would tell you in terms of that question.
Great. I love that answer. Love that answer. And great resource. Again, thank you for sharing that for us, Evans.
Yeah, I want to just jump in really quickly and add, so if you're in the New York area, New York City area, there's also the Mayor's Office of People with Disability that provide free training, free resources. And even if you're not in that area, you can go on their site and see some of those resources to help you in this space. And I know that there's another question, but since we that touches on this, since we leaned here, one of the tools, and I use this from Race Forward around the notion of equity, is thinking about an equity framework that asks who is either benefiting from our decision or indecision, who is being harmed by our decision or indecision, and who has been completely left out of the conversation. It's an excellent kind of 3-question tool to ask when you're processing equity in the space.
Awesome. Great.
You made me think of one more resource as well that's emerging. I just had a conversation with the executive director yesterday because I said, you know, we need to collaborate more and build partners and allies in this work. You don't need to do it yourself. In the Northwest, I'm a part of what's called the Institute for Sustainable Diversity and Inclusion, and we provide training, education, similar to this, workshops where we bring in thought leaders. But there's another organization called opentoall.org or .com. So look that up, Open to All. And they're doing a lot of work on this current pushback to DEI, and they're involved with a lot of the civil rights organizations and some of the national thought leaders in this space as well. So another resource that could be helpful to you as well.
Love that. I love that. I love that y'all touched on collaboration. We really, that's something that's very important in the space, such as what we have on the screen today from all different facets. So thank you for touching on that. Great, great insights. Hope y'all wrote down some of those resources. Incredible. Great question here. Tiffany, I think I'll kick this one question over here to you. We talk about leadership buy-in. Leaders are in a very tough predicament, as you know, in being a leader in this space. How are you approaching leadership to raise awareness to the pressures and rollback seen across the nation in terms of DEI?
That's a great question. I have a very unique seat, I think, with leaders being the CEO of Camber and all of our partners. We serve over 250 partners. And so this year, I've had the most phone calls I've ever had from leaders asking for, just having questions around the language, around the semantics, around how to continue the work. And so what I say to leaders, mid-level and executive team leaders, is to just seek out the answers. Do not stop the work. Do not be ashamed or taken back by not having all the answers. It's okay not to have the answers. I tell my leaders all the time to be vulnerable in this space, to be vulnerable with your teams, to be vulnerable with your staffing, to let them know that, hey, here are my concerns, but my commitment has not changed, right? And opening up the opportunity for dialogue and discussion, even around these topics that will instinctively create more synergy even within your team by just doing that one little step. And so it's really important, even as leaders, to lean into our vulnerability, even in times when we don't have all the answers, and really seek out the organizations and the resources and the tools from the space of, I don't have to know this answer, but I'm seeking the answer because I'm committed to the impact. And I'm not going to pull back my resources. I'm not going to pull back my commitment. I'm going to take the moment that I need to pause, to learn, to educate, and pull in my team to create another strategy that aligns with the laws and our commitment. And so in those spaces, this is the greatest time to be vulnerable with your teams, to create the impact that you're looking to create.
Love that, Tiffany. Be transparent. Leaders, did you hear that? Super important. All of us are leaders in essence too. So lean in, be transparent. Love that, Tiffany. Thanks for that take.
Sure.
Erica, I'm gonna pitch this question over to you. We talk a little bit about equity and equality, and a lot of people still don't know the difference between those. So I kind of have a 2-part question for you. What are practical ways to help people understand the difference between equity and equality? And then once we get into equity, who benefits from equity and who is left out of the conversation when we're talking about equity?
Absolutely. I think the notion plain and simple, equity is the notion that we must realize and recognize that not everybody starts from the same place. And so because not everyone starts from the same place, if we come in giving everyone the exact same thing, it doesn't lead us to equity. It leads to the notion of equality. And I know we've seen these drawings where there's, you know, 3 people standing in front of a fence, and they start off on the same place, and they give them all the exact same little crates, and it doesn't give everyone what they need. An even greater analogy is, how about we work on tearing down the fence, right? Like, why do we have these barriers to access anyway? And so the notion of equity is understanding, and that goes back to there's a history of inequities that has led to a difference in outcomes for people based upon a lot of race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status. And so when the notion of a commitment to removing barriers to creating greater access. And that really is.
Tear the fence down, huh, Erica? I like that.
Just tear it down. Yeah.
Tear it down. Tear it down.
Yeah. I hear people, and this is, I don't know, this is maybe a Southern thing, but I would hear this all the time where folks like, you know, this is crab in the barrel mentality between people in you know, in certain communities. And I'd say, well, who put the crabs in the barrel? They don't belong there.
Right.
They belong in the ocean. Right. Let's ask more questions about how we end up with the situations and circumstances that we have that can often lead to creating these spaces of a notion, a mindset of lack or competition instead of collaboration to get to greater equity. Sorry.
Could I just piggyback just a little bit on that as well? Inside an organization, what came to mind as you were speaking there was, if you think of equity and if you think about workforce representation, let's take that as an example. That's why I think it's important to sort of tease out workforce representation, because an organization can say, well, oh, I've got 30% people of color in the organization, or I've got fairly good representation of women. But then when you tease it out, you find that all of that representation is in one cluster in one part of the organization and not in what I'd characterize as the pipeline area for higher level positions in the organization. So what you have to do through your survey processes and everything else is you have to tease that out, because the data may tell you that, for example, if you're doing a survey, that, oh, everybody feels good about their experience. But when you say, well, let's look at that same data specific to women, specific to people of color, people, the LGBTQIA community, or people with disabilities, you might see, and you probably will see, a different response. So in my view, equity also means ensuring that people are equitably or represented in all facets of the organization.
Absolutely. And jumping in there, thinking about when we talking about being representative of the city you serve, right? If there is, if your workforce is completely skewed from the population of even candidates, it's something to question. And so with New York Roadrunners, we also do each year, you know, I believe in transparency, right? It's great for holding, I'd say this piece, starting out in the process, transparency is great for helping to hold yourself accountable and showing the community, your partners, where you are in the journey. So when we do our data demographics, it is by level. It is race, it's the information that's available, you know, through kind of ADP, so it's confidential, but that data is race, gender, ethnicity, and by level. So we understand where we are. And I've seen a lot of companies use this transparency, and I give Redfin Realty, many years ago, were one of the first folks I see to post their data to say, we want to be really clear about what we're doing well and what our pain points are and where we know we need to grow. And by being transparent in that, it will help us remain accountable and let you know that we're serious about the move.
Love that. Back again on transparency, even after the breakdown. So again, knocking it out the park. Great question. Good. This last one, I'm gonna try to combine. I know we're getting kind of short on time. This will probably be the last question. I know attendees. I know. We'll get to you though. This question, I'll try to combine and try to speak from a founder perspective and also possibly an employer perspective too. So it talks about being involved or trying to get into those spaces that may be traditionally white. For a founder who's trying to come into maybe an organization that's traditionally white and try to make an impression there, or an employee who finds themselves in an organization who they're the only person of color in that organization. How do you move in that space? I'll leave that open for anybody on the panel. That's a hot one.
As we all smile and laugh and chuckle. I'll kind of start it off and then I'll kind of just pass the mic. I'm going to start from the perspective of you as an individual. You need to really know who you are and your mission and your focus in the space. You need to really gear up emotionally. You need to gear up, professionally, and making sure that you're really aligned there. And I'm taking a moment to pause there and say that first before we kind of dive in. It's because when you enter into spaces that sometimes you may not be welcome, different things will be challenged internally and externally. And so you have to make sure that you're a fortified leader in the sense of knowing who you are and knowing the mission of the organization. Then from that point, you're really going to, put yourself out there for one of the greatest, most, I believe, risks that you'll probably take that will open up your world, right? And so really putting yourself out there in the sense of getting in organizations and being a part of different groups and networks in the different areas that you're looking to be established in. And then I'm going to kind of pass the baton probably to Erica to kind of take it from there.
And I say on the personal front, I do think there's no kind of one recipe here. There needs to be an analysis of where you are, how safe it is to express or question or speak or challenge. Some spaces are on a journey towards better and some are not. And you've got to understand or be able to assess kind of what the risk is, and also understand when you're going into the space, you may not even acknowledge the impact on your physical or mental health, right? When you are maybe being guarded on the words you speak or having to carefully select. And I tell this story, I attended a training maybe 8 years ago with Race Forward. And the gentleman asked a question and I answered what I thought, I think I'm a good student. I answered the question and he said, "Thank you for answering that. You were ever so articulate. You hit all the points. Now, can you take a breath and answer that question as if you weren't trying to make anyone in any space feel comfortable? I can tell by your response that you've become accustomed to speaking in a way that protects your safety." And it was a moment that I needed to pause and understand the impact that had been on me from being in spaces where I was the only. So I just shared that.
Just a couple of comments from me, and I'm reminded of you have kids and teenagers and so forth. You have that thing they call the talk, and oftentimes people who are not in that if you're the only Black person, for example, in that space, and you come with a certain cultural grounding, right? And so one of the things that I, growing up, was grounded in is that you always respect your elders and you speak when you're asked to speak and you just don't blurt out. So there was this cultural dimension of it that sometimes got in the way because you're saying, well, my instincts tell me that I should wait and have them ask me. It's the same with volunteering and participating in things in the organization, and that was something I had to learn to shift from because that wasn't the type of environment that I was in at that moment. I had to learn that, but that was one thing that I thought is just thinking about your cultural background and how it might create anxiety about this new environment and what you should or shouldn't do. That issue of transparency, right? Dummy up, in terms of if you look too smart and bright, there may be a group that might want to kind of keep you down and so forth. I mean, those were the kinds of things that were going on in my head. The other thing in later years that I learned about that we teach a lot of folks to engage in is this concept of intent and impact. And it's sort of those day-to-day slights when they happen to you. It's did that just happen to me? How to engage in a thoughtful conversation with that person in the workplace. When you said this is how it made me feel. What was your intent? And you assume positive intent, but you want to be clear that, you had a reaction to that, and you want them to know that, and you can share a little bit more about why you had that reaction and so forth. Left unaddressed, oftentimes, they start to pile up. And then what generally happens is the person say, I don't feel like I belong here, I'm leaving, and so forth. So those kind of things as well are important for a person kind of moving into this new environment and it could be unintentional. The person may not have any idea that they offended you, but if you don't speak up and talk about it and engage in a conversation with them, it'll eat at you. And I think your own mental and psychological safety is an important aspect of these environments.
Wow, that's powerful. Very, very insightful.
Really quickly, I think that
Please,
you make an excellent point around also the work that organizations have to do as they're looking to diversify, right? The notion is that you've got to understand what your current culture is, where there has been kind of one messaging and a space that just wasn't created for others. Many workspaces were not created with parents in mind, caregivers in mind, people with disabilities in mind. And so it is going back to rethink how you do everything you do, every aspect of the employee life cycle, and how you're showing up in communities. On a practical side, in terms of entering business spaces, I think looking for organizations that have shown or have a supplier diversity person or program, or whether this is like MWDBE certification and whether that puts you on certain lists. And in some ways it's the same, like looking for organizations that are actively looking to increase. And I know we didn't talk a lot about that, but when we talk about this work and organizations, I deeply, when I talk about being a good corporate citizen, a good citizen as an organization, you've got to ask who you're spending your money with, how you're spending it, your vendors, your contractors, your investment portfolio. So there's so many different pillars in your policies and practices and procedures.
Yeah, we refer to that as using the DEI lens in everything that you do, not just workplace, workforce, but your suppliers, your customers, the communities, regulators, all of it. And as you look at your strategies, your strategic plans, ask the company the question, can I see a copy of our strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years, and then go through the very specific elements of that plan and say, what's the DEI implication of the strategy you're trying to employ there? So try to take it and look at it in a more holistic sense in terms of everything that the organization does.
Powerful, y'all. Y'all made me move from sticky notes to the notebook. Hopefully, the attendees were able to get as much knowledge as I did. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for the insight. I hope that the attendees were able to grab as much information and some of the awesome resources that were shared as possible. So again, thank you. Thank you so much. Before we get out of here, I want to make sure that we have the opportunity for you all to walk away with some resources. And so we'll do that by sharing some of the things that Camber has in store for you here. So the first thing that we want to ensure that we give you this leadership toolkit. It is designed to help organizational leaders effectively navigate and promote inclusivity, even in the face of political changes and challenges. So this is just something quick that you can use to take some notes on, maybe use in meetings and things like that to get the conversation to move forward. So go ahead and scan. Tina will drop that link in the chat for me. Thanks so much, Tina. And then we'll share another resource with you all. We're really excited about this one. This next resource is called the Camber Culture Compass. And this resource is really put together to help you, again, move the conversation forward. You'll be able to use this to develop a little bit with your organizational leaders. Once you complete the questionnaire, our team will follow up with a summarization meeting to help you understand your results and provide direction into your journey based on your input. So fill that out. We look forward to kind of conversing with you, moving forward the conversation, again, by using our Camber Culture Compass. Last but not least, again, to keep these conversations going, we want to make sure that we provide you an opportunity to provide us feedback. We read it all. So thank you so much again for adding your input. We try to implement as much as we can to keep these webinars as hot as today's was. So thank you again for that. Tina will drop that link in the chat, and you can also share by looking at the QR code there. Last but not least, I want to make sure we give our CEO an opportunity to have some parting words. I know we're at the hour, but it's already hot, so just keep it.
It is. It
Going.
is amazing. I don't have too much more to say. I mean, today was phenomenal, Cheryl. Thank you so much. You always do an amazing job. And today was another one in the books. Kudos to you for sure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please definitely use the resources. Listen, these two expert panelists today, definitely stay connected with them. A great resource, and we are all committed to making sure that we change together, for we are truly better together. And anything that Camber can do, we are always open and available to support you in your efforts. And so until next time, we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. We'll leave you with our last screen. We'll help you keep in contact and stay in contact with Camber, as we have some amazing things coming up this year. So again, thank you. And I'll end it with something that we had here, which was keep the work going. Continue. Thank you all.